Thank you everyone for joining us. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about games for social good, but I want to do it in three parts. The first part is going to be just a minute. Let me also see if we can share the camera. The first part is going to be about my own story, and I'm going to basically show you how I got into this space, which might give other people ideas on what to do and how to get here. The second one will be more like talking more high level about the field. So I'm going to talk about how people are thinking about it. It's relatively a young industry, so what is the origin of games for change as a movement, as a genre? And the third part, I'm going to speak about some success stories, some case studies that are very pioneering in their approach, but also have evidence. So I'm going to share with you some numbers. So this is kind of our plan, three parts. As I said, we'll start from my personal story and how I got into this. And we're going now back in time. We're going to also another place completely. We're going to Israel, which is a very small place that most of you hear about a lot in the news. And just for the context, it's such a small place that the red dots that you're seeing now on the map is covering three neighboring countries. So it's really tiny, and this is where I grew up. And what you're going to see now is what people in Israel, especially kids, are growing up with. This is an authentic drawing that I did when I was 5 years old. My mother kept it. And, now I can compare because I have kids at that age, and you can see what a 5-year-old in Israel is immersed with. The national symbol, the conflict, the tanks, the airplanes. So this is really, for me, a demonstration of a country that is in a constant struggle. And, the news is always at the top of the headlines in the newspaper. I mean, the news about the conflict. More than entertainment, more than any other cultural news, it's always the conflict that everybody is talking about. Then, at the age of 18, you go to the army. So even if you try to avoid it for all of your life, this is where you go to the army and you have no chance but to go straight heads on and deal with, some life and death issues. By the way, this is me if you didn't recognize. And for me, it was actually a longer service than most. I served for 5 years in the intelligence unit in Israel, and this is a picture for my officer's course. I ended up being a captain. So, this is kind of the background that I grew up with. And then, in order to kind of run away from it, I went to entertainment in Israel, to the high-tech industry that I'm sure that many of you know that it's a very thriving industry in Israel. And I was doing mobile applications. Now we're talking about 2000 to 2003. We're talking about time where data services in the US, in America was really, really slow. It was almost non-existent. We had customers in Europe and in Asia. And we did location-based services in a very early stage that, before GPS, before location technologies, it was one of the first ever services on mobile for locating your friends and dating. And, it was fun for a while. I was flying to a different country every 1 or 2 weeks, Thailand and China and Switzerland and Belgium and, all over the world. But there was a disconnect because I showed you where I live and the background, and now I'm doing those applications that are pure entertainment, and I can do them. any place in the world. And soon the disconnect hit me, and I couldn't ignore anymore the fact that, the situation outside hasn't changed. So I decided to make a big change, and I moved to another big place, another another city in the U.S. It's kind of the decision that I made that I want to study more and open my mind. I went to Pittsburgh, and there I had a real privilege to, or even luck, I would say, to sign up for a program called the Entertainment Technology Center, the ETC. Back then, again, very new. I mean, now it's much more known, but back then when I made the choice, it was really the beginning of something like that. The idea that you can teach artists and scientists. You can bring designers like me and people from computer science and engineering together. And the man that you see on the slide is called Randy Pausch. I'm pretty positive that, if it was now a talk in a room, I would ask you to raise hands. Who knows Randy? But usually I get a fair amount of people that heard the story about the last lecture. Randy was not only my teacher, he was also the guy that started the program, the Entertainment Technology Center, and he came together with his partner with the idea that you can put together the right brain and the left brain. And when I came to Carnegie Mellon, he was still very active. The story of the last lecture, I really recommend you to watch the YouTube, but it's really the last lecture, literally the last lecture that he did before he died. At the age of 46, he got the bad news that he has cancer and that he has 6 months to live. And he made this very, very impressive, insightful, inspiring speech on how he achieved all his life, all his childhood dreams already in his lifetime, and that he's basically facing death with courage and, feeling really wholesome about it. And that went viral. Someone took it on video, and then became really a huge success worldwide. He wrote a book before he died, again, all in a span of 6 months. And it's really a phenomenon. And he was an amazing teacher. Back to the story, when I came to Carnegie Mellon, I was 10 years older because I did the army and I was in the Israeli industry. I was 10 years older than most students, and I felt that I can kind of come up with a bold speech. And I said, connecting everything that you saw together, I said, you know what? I want to make a video game about the Middle East conflict. I want to make a video game not only about the Middle East conflict, I want to make a video game where Israel and Palestine for the first time can work together. And that was the response. To be more accurate, what Randy said, the faculty was sitting, they made it kind of look like a company pitch, very serious faces, and then he said, it's widely out of scope. That he doesn't see how a group of students, as talented as they are, can make something like this. Remember, it's 2004. Video games are all about entertainment, all about consoles. There are no Facebook games, no mobile games. Most of the video games are pretty violent, and the whole idea seemed interesting, but completely insane at that time. And to his credit and to the faculty's credit, they let us try. And not only that it turned into a successful student project, we actually went all the way. We created the Peacemaker as a commercial product. We started a company out of school, and we sold the game in 60 countries. We had enormous attention from the media and the community. We got to be in over 200 media outlets, from CNN to ABC to basically every media outlet that you can think of. We released the game in 2007, and until now I get interview requests about Peacemaker. Now, it's not only about what we did. Obviously, there is a story here. The idea that the gaming industry at that time was very narrow in what it could cover. And a group of students from Carnegie Mellon, later on entrepreneurs, came with this idea that is very different than what the industry deals with. So on one hand, you're going against all odds, and you're doing something that doesn't necessarily have a market. But at the same time, you are so disruptive that everybody pays attention to it. What I want to show you now is a video. I'm going to speak over the video, and just to explain to you, let's see how the sound works here, but just so you see a bit footage from the game and also some of the media coverage for Peacemaker.
Peacemaker is a game in which you take the role of one of the leaders. You can take either the role of the Israeli Prime Minister or the Palestinian President. You can play both perspectives. And the idea is that as the leader, you have to react to real-time events happening in the world. You can negotiate with other leaders, but you also have security or military action that you can take. And by doing so, you have to reach a peaceful solution while in office.
In an Israeli high school, a new computer game called Peacemaker was launched today. Children playing the role of Israeli and Palestinian leaders trying to make peace in a virtual world of suicide bombings and Israeli military strikes.
We don't expect to address all issues of the conflict. We don't expect to give all the answers. We're bringing up issues for discussion.
I think the best aspect of playing this game is that, especially if you're a Palestinian student in the territories or an Israeli student within Israel, you get a chance to really feel what both sides are thinking and get a better sense of what they can do together to work towards peace.
If you look at the video game industry today, there are so many games out there about violence, about war, about destruction. We say a simple thing: there is certainly a place for one little game about peace.
So this is back to the story. That was in 2007, and as I said, very disruptive. And also we got a lot of attention from, just like you saw in the video, from politicians. In one case, the guy that you see in front of you, his name is Danny Atom. And Danny Atom was the head of the Mossad in Israel. The Mossad is like the Israeli CIA, that I'm sure most of you know. And he was also at that time running to be a prime minister. And he agreed, which I think was a mistake, to play Peacemaker live on TV. And he lost after 5 minutes. And it was all recorded. And he lost because he basically took a series of military actions without paying any attention to the other side. And the reporter is asking him on the show, I mean, why did you make all those moves? And what do you think about the game? So Danny is saying, look, the game is completely unrealistic. I mean, I did all the right things. So this made us understand, as the creators of the game, that we should probably go for the young generation, because the other, the old generation, the politicians are already lost on us. So we went for the young generation, and until this day, there are workshops with Peacemaker in both the West Bank and Israel. The Perez Center for Peace, the non-profit, is running those workshops with students. Very interesting work, and very important because it's not part of the curriculum. So many times Peacemaker, rather than being just a game and an experience, it's really a gateway to speak about those issues. And the Perez Center, the non-profit, purchased 100,000 copies from us and distributed those copies in both countries. And I think that this is probably, one of the only cases where CDs of a game were distributed free in such large numbers, also through the newspapers. So I'm going to move to the next part, where I told you that we're going to speak about a large sector And I'm going to take the quote from Spider-Man, the idea that if you have great power, it's also important to exercise some responsibility. And, it's interesting that recently I discovered, speaking to the American Library Association, that actually this quote is not originated in Hollywood. It was first spoken by Voltaire in the 19th century, talking about friends. So why is it related to games? It's related to games because we certainly have the power. We're talking about a huge industry with $72 billion in sales worldwide. Now the numbers are even higher. We're talking about an industry that one of its products, Grand Theft Auto, in November 2014, made $1 billion in 3 days. Sorry, I think it was 13. So $1 billion in 3 days. Just for comparison, it took Avatar, the movie Avatar, 3 months to get the same number. We're talking about an industry that has an audience that is just extending because the people that grew up with games are now parents and they're now executives and decision makers. We're also talking about many more women playing games, especially with new platforms like Facebook and mobile. We're talking about, this is Jane McGonigal's research, 3 billion hours a week that we spend on video games. So if you look at all of that, this is, by the way, my daughter. If you look at all of that, you say, where's the responsibility? It's great that we have entertainment. It's great that this very successful industry is doing, artistic and entertainment products. But like any other media, where is the responsibility and where is the social change? Where is the learning and education? And now we have more of that, and part of it is because the work that we're doing, Games for Change and other organizations. If you think about it, every media has this ability. We're talking about books and the work that someone like Charles Dickens does. The success economically, financially, but also the success in portraying different issues. The idea that comic books could be about serious issues, and now we're even calling them graphic novels. The idea that TV series can do even comedies in a very real-world, serious context. The idea that you have documentaries that become very sophisticated in being also entertaining and being very successful in what they're doing, and the idea that video games can be the same, and this is kind of what we're talking about these days when we speak about video games. This is, by the way, the Oscars in the last 5 years. So even the Oscars, that it's definitely mainstream. It's definitely the most blockbusters, most common denominator. Even the Oscars are dealing with political and social issues more and more. So we think that games can do the same. And we're doing it as Games for Change. Now we're partners with the Tribeca Film Festival. And we're doing every year with Robert De Niro and his partners, we're doing this big event that has a conference, but also has a public arcade. The idea that we put games on the streets, and these are very unique games. These are games that are meant to do positive change. And most of the people that meet them for the first time. The festival, we did the 12th edition this year. And these are some of the people that spoke at Games for Change, from Vice President Al Gore to Supreme Court Justice Day O'Connor to the U.S. CTO. So we really had the privilege to bring very, very big speakers. We also had a very interesting development that the Oscars of the video games, the Game Awards, put a Games for Change category for the first time last year. So that was a recognition of the genre. I'm sure that many of you heard about Gamergate. I'm not going to speak too much about Gamergate, but I want to also signify this milestone You know, it was a very, very harsh and tough period for the gaming industry. But at the same time, it showed that the change is coming, and you know, the status quo is not going to stay. And this is Anita Sarkisian, one of the leaders of the movement against, you know, against kind of the lack of diversity and in content and in the nature of the creators. I'm going to speak now about the third part of our conversation, and I'm going to show you a few case studies. And the idea was that we started to look at what impact games can make, and we kind of divided it to 5 categories. What impact? I mean, it's not like everything is the same, obviously. Each category here has a different focus. From learning that is definitely the idea that you are transferring knowledge and skills. And, you know, the people that you're going to probably consult with, if you're a game designer, are people in education. The second category is communication. You want to raise awareness. The people that you're going to consult with here are people that run campaigns. The third one is the idea that you can, because games are so interactive and social and location-based, especially the new platforms like mobile and augmented reality, you can build a social movement. You can build a social power with a game. The fourth category is something that you know, most commonly is known as the gamification. The idea that you take an existing program or service, you add gaming elements to make it more engaging and motivate more people. And the last category is probably the most ambitious one for social change. It's behavior change. Can we actually change the action of people that play the game? I want to show you some numbers from 5 case studies that I collected. The first one is iCivics. iCivics started by Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. And you can see here the numbers that they achieved through the years. They created 21 games and 120 lesson plans. They reached 7 million students, and they are now in 50 states. In essence, they reached more than 50% of schools in the United States that have social studies. So iCivics became the go-to program for civic education, all with video games. What's more interesting to me is that some of the kids, actually almost 1 out of 2, are playing the game in their free time at home. So this is very exciting. I chose for the awareness piece, the communication, a game called Dumb Ways to Die. I'm sure that many of you know or heard about it, but I want just to show you quickly maybe the clip that goes with the game. It's a very, very interesting campaign.
Set fire to your hair, broke a stick at a grizzly bear, eat medicine, die.
I'm not going to show you the full clip, but the idea here is that it was done by the Metro Association in Melbourne. And what they wanted to do is raise awareness for safety in the metro system, that people are not going to fall into the tracks. And what's very interesting about this campaign is that most of the video that you saw and the game and the app are not about safety in trains. 80 to 90% of the content is about stupid ways to die, and only 10% are stupid ways to die because of the subway. And, you know, whether you fall into the tracks, whether you try to jump over the tracks, and other really dumb ways to risk your life. The third case study is making money, and I'll tell you quickly the story. The story here is that the game is, by the way, mostly non-digital. The digital component is very limited. But what they did is they created a new currency, new money, that they called Macon money, and they divided the bills into 2, and they put them into communities. what they wanted to achieve through the game, the impact objectives were to connect the two communities, one of them mostly white and one of them mostly African American. They wanted the people to meet each other. And what they also wanted to do is to encourage local businesses. So what they did is they divided the bonds, the money, and people needed to come together and find the other half and then go to local businesses and spend the money. And it was a great success in terms of what it did to the economy and what it did to the connections between people. For example, many of you probably heard about the game Fold It. You remember the fourth category is how we can take something that people do anyway or computers do anyway and gamify it. In this case, it was a massive success. A scientist created this game after the computers couldn't solve this issue of specific challenge of folding proteins for 10 years and more. And players did it in 10 days. And that led to publications in Nature magazine. It led to the fact that this really solved a real world issue. So it's not a simulation, it's a real problem in science that gamers could solve together. The last example about behavior change is the game Remission. And Remission is a video game that was created to help cancer patients, young cancer patients, to understand what they're going through. But it did much more than that. It didn't only explain to them the disease and what cancer does to their body, it actually led them to follow the treatment in a much better way. And the most amazing thing about this research, that by the way also went to publications, medical publications, is that it didn't take long to play the game in order to get the effect. Sometimes it was enough to play a short session of less than an hour to have been affected for a very long time. It's very interesting. And also the brain research that people from Hope Lab did showed that the areas in the brain that are stimulated really have to do with learning and motivation, which is a very interesting kind of new direction that people in our community are taking, which is the neuroscience of what games can actually do to the brain that more passive ways of consuming information cannot. So this is where I am. I hope that you guys are going to create games, support games, fund games, and that we can all see your game next year in the webinar in one of the slides here. And now let me try to get back to the presentation so we can actually get some of your questions and basically have a more interactive conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Aziz. So our next question is from Deepika. Is that, how do we promote digital games when access of technology is such a big challenge?
Yeah, so this is a great question because we have now a project that we are actually running in two countries, in India and in Kenya. And it's around the project we've done with one of the New York Times most known reporters and authors, Nicholas Kristof, around Half the Sky. It's called Half the Sky, and it's around women empowerment. And what we wanted to create are apps, very simple apps that can help women, for example, with their pregnancy. So right now, in communities in India and Kenya, the most common way to speak to women about pregnancy is through a non-profit that use very, very low-tech tools, brochures, flipboards, very boring, in a way, very boring materials. And what we did, we created mobile games that are much more engaging. But what we've done, we didn't create those mobile games for the latest phones. we actually went back to the most dominant model. Back then, it was kind of the last generation of phones, and we had to make the games very, very simple, 200 kilobits, and those games were distributed by the NGOs, by the nonprofits. So we solved the technology problem, but we also used the partners on the ground to make sure that even if someone comes to the meeting with no device, that the nonprofits are going to use the games as part of their discussions.
Thank you, Aziz. Anamika is online now. So she has sent her question on chat, and her question is, how different is designing games intended for social change to designing casual games? And how do we weave in the element of social impact into the game design?
Yeah, that's another great question, because it's probably one of the most difficult and one of the most challenging items when you are approaching a project like this. Look, making a good game is tough in itself. Making a game that is engaging, that is taking attention of people, that makes them come back to play more. And then, the added layer of social change is, just another challenge. So it's almost arguably a double challenge to approach a project like this. The other thing is, you don't want to make the content, the social change piece, feel that it's patched, that it's not integrated into the game. So the real key, it's easy to say, much more difficult to do, is to make sure that the mechanics of the game is aligned with the message. Now, when we think about mechanics, this is different than any other medium, right? Because if it was a movie, if it was a book, I would have said, make sure that the narrative and the story aligns with the message. But here it's different. The games are driven by mechanics. In order to make a game really matter, it's not only the story, it's really about the action. What the player can do, what are the choices, what are the consequences, how the player can make progress, what is the winning, what is the losing. All of those things go into the design, and they need to align with the content. And usually, bad games for change, or games for change that are not successful, they have this mechanic that doesn't align with the content. The content feels like it's being added as an afterthought, and not part. And by the way, another common mistake is that you take a game that is entertainment and you try to skin it and make it a game for change. This is not, Tetris was created for another reason. So to make a Tetris about women hygiene, it just doesn't feel right.
Another great question that we have from one of our participants is that paper games are gaining a lot of attention these days. Do you see a scope for paper games leading social game as well? Is the industry following that trajectory, or is it limited to digital games?
You're asking about digital games versus physical games?
Yes, paper games. Paper games or board games, because...
Yeah. So actually, I see more and more people that are trying to do non-digital games. First of all, there is a rise in general in the popularity of board games now, and card games, kind of renaissance, even for consumers. But I think the other point here is that sometimes, you ask me about technology, sometimes it makes sense to make a board game or a card game. It's much cheaper, it can solve issues of accessibility. The only main challenge with paper games is scale. If you want the game to really reach millions of people, you have much more trouble than if it's a digital game. I've seen some great examples. I actually teach a class at the School of Visual Arts in New York City, And because we have only one semester, most of the projects are non-digital, board games, and people are doing amazing work, around immigration or around, ADHD and other problems. And one of those projects actually got, after they did it as a class project, they got serious funding through a contest, and now they're actually publishing their game, and it's a board game with cards. It's not a digital game, and it's around sex trafficking, and it's very targeted to the social workers that work with women that are affected.
Thank you, Aziz. Our next question is from Jolene Fisher, and he wants to know, in creating games like the HTS suite, how did you decide what issues are most important to address?
So that's a good question. Many times when you work with a partner and you are a game developer, the partner, whether it's a non-profit, a university, or someone like Nicholas Christoph and Cheryl Woodan in the case of Off the Sky, the partner is the expert on the content. So you as a game designer or game developer, you become almost like a translator. You become someone who needs to get the essence from the content expert and understand what really matters. Some of it, it's not so easy to get out. Sometimes you need to ask a lot of questions. So I'll give you an example about the pregnancy. We wanted to make a game to address maternal mortality and some of those big questions. So we went to India for a pretty long trip, and we asked a lot of people, like, what is the number one problem? What do you think is the gap that we can address with the game? And the answer that we kept hearing was, look, there are certain things that people need to do during pregnancy. And in many places, especially remote villages, these things are not done. And some of it is pretty straightforward. It's the shots, or going to the doctor in certain intervals, or giving birth with some supervision. These are things that are true for any country. They're true for people that live in remote places in the U.S. And that's why we've tackled those. We call the game 9 minutes, because in 9 minutes you play the 9-month cycle, and it's all about what you should do and what you shouldn't do during pregnancy. And in some cases, we raised awareness from 4% to 70% around an issue like this. So it's really coming from the people that are experts, and not only that they're experts in the content, they also meet the population and the audience for many, many years, and you can rely on their expertise in terms of defining your goal.
Yeah, I totally agree with this, Aziz. Our next question is one of the participants from India, and her question is, how do we make sure that the player has an impactful experience, such that there is an actual behavioral change as a result of such games? Because just making a game is not enough.
Yeah, so I would say that there are two answers to that. One is that in many cases I saw a lot of success when the game was part of a larger campaign. You can see it in the example I showed you with Dumb Ways to Die. The game had a video clip, had billboards. It wasn't just a game. There were many ways to reach audiences. It's true to After Sky. After Sky is a book. After Sky is a documentary. After Sky is a series of games. So you reach the audience through a transmedia approach. The second answer I would say is that you should put your expectations in check. I would say that if you are creating a game and it can demonstrate that you are making change in perception and change in behavioral attitudes, that's a lot. So even if you didn't show that people change their actions, even though I showed you examples like remission that can do that, but even if you just showed that people think differently about a certain behavior. That's a lot. And you can build on that with other games, with other media, and with other materials. But I'm just cautioning versus, immediately jumping to the most ambitious goal from the very start. It needs to be built. Think about smoking. Smoking in the United States, it took decades to change behavior. And even now, it's not completely done. But think about how many different approaches were taken in order to make it so.
Yeah. As a follow-up question, I have another question from Anamika.
So my question to you is, how do you measure the social impact of such games?
Okay, so that's the $64 million question, or 64,000, or whatever you want. This is definitely a challenge in our community because the evaluation is many times expensive. If you can allow yourself to put in the budget a piece for evaluation, I would say always do it. You can do it as a third-party evaluation. Many times I saw great results when you can involve the people that evaluate the product already in early stages, so they can help you to think about your theory of change. However, if you don't have budget at all, I think there are many ways that designers and developers can do their own research. Let's call it research planning. Like, think about the things they want to measure. So even if they don't have the experts on their side, the people that do evaluation for programs, what are the things that you want to measure that are related to the impact of your game? So, for example, reach is not enough. If all you're going to measure is engagement and how many people you reach, that's not the impact you want to achieve. Many times you would want to measure other things, and those things will be directly related to how players make progress in the game, because many times the actions and progress they make in the game is directly related to how much of what you try to convey is actually being conveyed. You can also do a lot, again, obviously with expert evaluations it would be much more robust, but you can do a lot by asking players the right questions. You don't need a huge demographics to do that. You can speak with some of your players and understand a lot how the game is affecting them and what they get. And many times you'll be surprised that they get messaging and they get outcomes that you didn't necessarily intend for.
Thank you, Asi. Our next question is from Latika Edwards from National Endowment for the Arts.
This is kind of a segue from the previous question, but given that game development has so many stakeholders, I'm just curious if you can talk a bit about the importance of language and defining impact of games.
So this is a great question, and I think that a lot of it is about building the coalition. The way we approach some projects is that we, being minded that we have so many stakeholders, we from the very beginning made sure that we are aligned in how we speak about the project, how we want to measure the project, what are the goals of the project. When I work with partners and clients these days, and we do it all over the world, I'm starting with a workshop. And the workshop is as much about brainstorming as it is about stakeholders alignment. And, many times, even in the same organization, you will have different views on how the project should be done and what things should be emphasized and how impact should be measured. And part of what we're doing is doing the workshop for a whole day from 9 to 4 or 5 p.m. And then at the end, we're producing a paper. So the paper actually goes over, we have a methodology that is called the 8-step methodology that is about asking those very tough questions on what impact do we want to do, what is the audience, where people are going to play the game, etc., etc. And we basically sending a paper that gives a summary of all those big points, so people can agree on them And later on, they always go back to that paper because this is where we started. It doesn't mean that we cannot change along the way, but it's a very good place to start from.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Latika, for your question. I think Geetika wants to ask a question. Geetika?
Hello.
Hi, Geetika. Yeah, you can ask your question.
So I was wondering, Asi, that given that this is more of a thinking about games for change seems to me like a very noble thing to work on. But do the market returns of such serious games break even the cost? I'm asking this with reference to encouraging young designers and programmers taking this up.
So the good news is that in general, especially in the US, which to me is showing it's almost like the way that things are going, and many times you see it very very quickly in other areas in the world. So what I want to say is that in the US, indie games and casual games have much more chance to succeed than in the past. Together with that comes competition. Obviously, if it's much easier to make games and distribute games, then there are many more games to compete with. But I do think that at the end of the positive is more dominant than the negative in this case, and you have much more chance to create games that are not as expensive as if they were 5 or 10 years ago, and you have much more chance to get out there with a good game. The other part to that is the idea that there is a new generation of creators that grew up with games, not only as a player, but it's almost like it became part of their expression. And I see better games for change as a result. And also I see games for change that come from developers, not because someone came to them and asked them to make those games and paid them, but because they were very passionate. And just like we did Peacemaker, nobody came to me and said, can you make a game about the Middle East? It was something I wanted to say to the world. I'll give you one example from recent months, a game called This War of Mine. This War of Mine is a game about civil war, and it's a game about the civilian perspective, not the soldier's perspective. It's a very dark game, but it's made, they broke even in 2 days because they were a very small team, and they put it on Steam, and it became a great success. The last number I heard was that they made $7 million, but in 2 days they already brought back the development money. Papers, Please is another example of a successful game financially. And again, I think we'll see more and more of those high quality, very engaging, serious games.
I think that with us, Asi, it's nice to know that financial success also follows novel ideas, and that is something that becomes a consideration for quite a few young people, I find.
I would just add that I think that, we're still speaking about the majority of games in this sector that are being funded by public organizations, and that's fine. Public media is funded by non-profits and governments for decades. So I think this is one way to get games out into the world. But at the same time, the more we'll see games that could be sustainable and make revenue and still be meaningful, that would be fantastic.
Yes, I'm sure that this is a fairly new field within the field of gaming, and a lot of great success is to follow. Thank you very much, Asi, for taking out the time for speaking with us and all our attendees today. It's been a very, very inspiring and impactful talk, and we can't wait for another one, I must say. This was surely a very an impactful and an experience full of learning for us.
Thank you very much to you for hosting me and to promoting it so well. Thank you.